You're struggling to speak Spanish because you've been training the wrong things. You wouldn't do squats for abs, so why learn Spanish that way? I'm Hamid, I'm 16, I'm fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. Here's my quick before and after.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And here's how to finally speak Spanish with natives. And we're going to end off with a free gift if you make it to the end. So, exactly as I said in the beginning of this video, you're struggling to speak Spanish because you've been doing the wrong things. Okay? It's probably not that you haven't been working hard enough, because then you would know that that's the constraint. It's probably not that you don't have enough resources, because basically everyone has access to the internet. It's mainly because you're not allocating your time towards the things that is required for conversations with natives. And the reason why this is such a constraint is because the person who has several paths that they're going on, if we have, like the person who is doing one thing, and then doing another thing, and then doing another thing, and then doing another thing, is going to move much slower than the person who focuses on one sole task, because he's not distracted by all these side quests. And so what this means for Spanish is the person who wants stronger abs is going to do ab exercises, because that's what moves him that way. All this other stuff is just distractions, even if it's slightly beneficial. And so now I'm going to go through exactly how to do this. And it starts with Spanish versus real Spanish. So before that summer, I just broke it down, okay? When I saw these YouTubers and saw what actually worked, I just sort of broke it down, okay? What is the goal? Well, for me, the goal was always being able to have conversations with natives. And so I just sort of broke it down systematically, okay? What are the things that are required for that? Like, what do I need to do and what do I not need to do? Basically, what is required and what is not required. And so I broke it down to these fundamental concepts. So most people learn Spanish the conventional way, which is actually exactly how I started, by doing Duolingo and these random apps. And it's actually why most people don't succeed. You probably know this, and this is actually the first concept that I saw these YouTubers implement that actually was relevant to me, that I implemented. And it was that real Spanish, real world Spanish, is different to what school and all these different apps have been teaching us. Real world Spanish is different. It's not like the Duolingo Pablo thing, because if it was, then everyone would understand fast Spanish, but they don't. And what I saw with the YouTubers that actually got fluent very quickly was that they were actually studying what I like to call real Spanish, compared to the Spanish in quotation marks that I had been studying before and wasting my time on, which you can probably relate to that. So a quick example is just, how do Spaniards actually speak? How do natives actually speak? Firstly, do you think they would say, hola, yo hablo español? Or would they say, hola, hablo español? Okay? Firstly, obviously the latter, okay? Because it's very obvious that hola, yo hablo español sounds very Englishy, very, very gringo. But then there's also the Spanish in quotation marks, which is what I'm actually really trying to hone in on. This hola, yo hablo español. The difference is much bigger than what you think. Because even if we have correct Spanish vowels, like we don't pronounce it like aquí estoy, we don't pronounce it like aquí estoy, we pronounce it like aquí estoy, like with the Spanish accent. That still isn't real Spanish. Let's take these strings of words. Aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas. This way of speaking, like that way of saying the words, that is used here and there. But what real Spanish sounds like is, comparatively, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay mucho problema. You can see how much shorter and like put together those sentences are. And so the first thing I noticed was that these YouTubers that got conversation fluent extremely quickly were not focusing on fake Spanish. They were really going in on real Spanish. Because think about it. What is fluency? What is conversational fluency? What is a conversation? A conversation is where the person is speaking real Spanish. They're not speaking slow Spanish. Just like how in English, if we're having a conversation, you're speaking fast English. You're speaking real English. And when I say real English, I'm talking about like speaking by putting together words and using some slang words and using your accent. Real English doesn't sound the same as what the Spaniards have been learning. Because Spaniards learn, hello, my name is Hamid. I like to go outside to do sports. And then I like to... That's not real English, is it? Because no one in their right mind would speak like that. In the same way in Spanish, no one is going to be like, hola, ¿cómo estás? Bien. ¿Y tú? ¿Cómo estás? Bien. That's not real Spanish, is it? And just to really hone in on this point, if someone was to learn English to go to the US, would they study the Indian accent of English or the American accent? Obviously the American one. So when you look at Duolingo and these apps, where it is completely like cut off from reality, and the reality being conversations with natives, you start to realize that why would you ever do that? And it was that point I realized that like this main method of studying doesn't actually work. And it's one of the biggest reasons why you're struggling to have conversations with natives. You wouldn't do squats to train your abs, even if squats does engage the core. Like if you do squats, it does engage your core to do the squats, but you would probably rather choose crunches than squats for your abs. And so every method does work, okay? What I'm saying is every method out there does work, just like how every exercise generally does train the abs. But you would probably move the fastest if you directly train the abs, if your goal was to improve your abs. And so in the same way, I focused all my energy on the actual goal, which was real Spanish. And so I moved extremely quickly in that endeavor. I suck at telling the time and ABCs and writing novels in Spanish, but I never cared about that. And so one part of the real reason why you are struggling to speak Spanish with natives is that you haven't been focusing on the things that get you to having conversations with natives. And that is real Spanish. Because the reality is natives aren't going to say, Hola, ¿cómo estás? Bien, ¿y tú? Natives aren't going to do that. And if they do, what kind of fluency is that? And so along with Spanish was a real Spanish, I started noticing like a formula, an equation for what fluency was. And that included the actual exercise, the actual things that I need to hone in on and divert all my attention to in order to have conversations with natives. And so it's what I call the fluency equation. And it all starts with just defining fluency, okay? Because everyone likes to throw this word around, fluency, I'm fluent. Everyone throws the word around, no one really has a good definition for it. And so eventually when I was starting off before that summer of 2022 where I decided to hone in on Spanish and actually get fluent, I had already come to my perfect definition. And you can probably relate to this. From the YouTubers I'd seen, I'd recognize a simple definition of fluency. And this is also the definition of fluency that is applied in the Oxford dictionaries, okay? It's this. Fluency is defined as being fluent, which is defined as having fluidity when you speak, having a flow of words. That is fluency. Now, usually, being fluent is defined as being able to speak effortlessly and articulately. That is what a lot of people on the internet try to throw around. But that isn't actually accurate in relation to what most people think fluency is. Because as we saw, fluency is just having flow in your words, right? But a lot of times, people are saying that fluency is being able to effortlessly and articulately express oneself. But that isn't accurate into what the majority of people actually want out of fluency. Because if I can speak fast, necessarily mean that I can hold a conversation. In fact, there's probably many people that you know who don't speak extremely quickly in English, who are maybe a bit soft-spoken and shy, but are still completely fluent in English. You might be that type of person. And so fluency isn't just this definition of a flow of words. But on the other hand, fluency does have to include a flow. And so what I like to do, and this is specifically the definitions that I recognized or language lords had defined, which was conversational fluency and native fluency. So both of these have a flow, but the difference is where the flow is. So conversational fluency is just being able to have a conversation in Spanish where both parties understand each other to the point where they can have a full conversation. Here is the distinction. The flow or the fluidity is in the conversation, not necessarily only in your speech. And a conversation by definition is basically just a back and forth, okay? I say something, you understand what I say, and then we switch. That is a conversation. It is this back and forth switching of roles, and there are only two roles. Now, native fluency is when you are indistinguishable from a native, and this is where you will be able to completely effortlessly articulate yourself no matter what, and also do every other sort of task. And so these are the two levels of fluency. There are some levels in between, but these are the only two that are worth tracking. And so it matters because of what I like to call the effort discrepancy, which is that conversational fluency takes way less time and effort and you get most of the results from the language. Whereas native level fluency takes a lot more time and effort and it's not that much results that you get. And so to put it into perspective, conversational fluency took me 120 hours of studying spread across 5 to 6 months. Native level fluency is something I'm still working on. And that just sort of shows you, I got most of my results from Spanish after getting conversationally fluent. That's where I'm able to basically bust out conversations with anyone. Like I'm basically just use the language in my day-to-day life. And so conversational fluency is always the goal, okay? 99% of benefits from the language comes from conversational fluency, not perfection, okay? So putting this into a formula, putting conversational fluency into a formula is this equation. And I really want you to listen here because this is the sauce. This is the actual meat and potatoes of why you're struggling to have conversations with natives. A conversation is fundamentally two aspects that are being used. Speaking and understanding. Those are the only two skills that are occurring in a conversation. So let me elaborate. A conversation is back and forth. What are the two skills that are used in a back and forth? Think about it. It's speaking and understanding. I'm speaking, and then you're understanding my audible speech. So when I say understanding, we're talking about understanding audible Spanish, right? So it's I'm speaking and you're understanding me. And then when it's your time to speak, it's you're speaking and I'm understanding you. So there's only two skills that is required. And adding the previous concept to this, it would be real Spanish, because in a conversation, we're trying to get real Spanish fluency. We're trying to speak real Spanish with natives. And so it would be speaking real Spanish, so Spanish that actually sounds native, and understanding real Spanish, so understanding actual natives. Because what do you need to do in a conversation? You need to speak so that the native understands, and then understand when the native speaks. So it's only those two aspects. And so fundamentally, exactly what I said in the beginning of this video, the reason why you're not progressing in having conversations with natives is because you've been progressing in the parts of the language that aren't in the fluency equation. And thus, you're not training your abs. You're training your legs for abs. And that's why you're not progressing. Elaborate on this a little further, which is actually what I discovered after like 10 to 20 hours of learning Spanish. It's that every single sentence in Spanish can be boiled down to grammar multiplied by vocabulary. And so grammar is the logic, vocabulary is like the bricks. And you need the blueprint to build the bricks. So it's those two parts, okay? And so the key part here is, anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language, let alone Spanish, was through this equation. And anything that isn't a part of this equation will not get you closer to fluency. Now here's the thing. You might be thinking like, okay, but I am reading grammar books. And it's true. That's why every single method that you see online can work, okay? That's why there are people who are fluent in Spanish that are propagating really bad advice. The issue doesn't lie in what works or doesn't work, because fundamentally, pretty much every program is going to implement some parts of the fluency equation, which is why fundamentally, even Duolingo can get someone fluent, okay? And I've actually seen that happen. This YouTuber got conversationally fluent with 2,000 days of Duolingo. But that's the issue right there, that it just takes much longer. Okay? And so showing the AI analysis of my transformation, you can see that I did save hundreds of hours compared to the average learner because I implemented the fluency equation right. Okay, so just before we move on to exactly how to implement the fluency equation, if you want to implement these frameworks, including the fluency equation, and finally start learning Spanish in a clear and structured way, then you can check the description to join my program, which is the only program that actually implements the fluency equation the best. And I know that because I actually invented the fluency equation. So you can check the description for that. Back to the video. And so to actually implement the fluency equation, we're going to use what I like to call the LUR and SUR ladders. And it is very, very simple, okay? So we have the equation. Now the question is, how do we improve those skills, aka the skills of speaking Spanish and understanding spoken Spanish? And the answer to that question is extremely simple. By speaking and understanding spoken Spanish. Because in the same way that if you want to get stronger abs, you need to train your abs. If you want to get better at a certain skill, you should do that skill. And so what you'll notice is getting fluent in Spanish is simple, but not easy. And that actually applies for most things in life, okay? Most people know exactly how to lose weight, right? Calorie deficit. Everyone knows that. So it's simple, but it's not easy. There's still discipline required, and etc. Same thing with building a business. Most people who have ever started a business understand that it's very simple. You sell a product in exchange for money. It's simple, but it's not easy. And so just like that, learning Spanish is extremely simple, just not easy. And so the simpleness lies in what I like to call the LUR and SUR ladders. So you get better at speaking and understanding Spanish by speaking and understanding Spanish. Wow, shocker, right? And so to get better at understanding spoken Spanish, the framework would look like this. You'd listen to spoken Spanish, then you'd understand that spoken Spanish, because you probably don't understand spoken Spanish now. That's probably why you're watching this video. And then you'd repeat those two steps. So you'd listen, understand, and repeat. And that's what I like to call LUR, okay? And to get better at speaking Spanish, you would speak Spanish, and then since you didn't know how to say something in Spanish, you would understand how to say something in Spanish, so you'd learn how to say something in Spanish because you don't speak Spanish, so now you're going to understand how to say something in Spanish, and then you're going to repeat. So you're going to speak Spanish, you might not know how to say something in Spanish, so then you're going to learn how to say something in Spanish, and then you're going to say that thing in Spanish, and then you're going to repeat over and over again. Very simple. So SUR, speak, understand, and repeat. And so this is what they look like visually, and this is basically a visual representation of the fluency equation. And what this means is fluency is at the top of these ladders, and technically these ladders are actually infinitely long, but conversational fluency is at basically a point of these ladders, and native level fluency is at like the absolute top. And even not there, because even natives are still doing this. And so the more you climb, the better your Spanish will get, and anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language was through climbing these 2 ladders. And I'll actually tell you a quick story to prove that, and then I'll give you that free gift that I was talking about. So, in my class, I had 2 Arabic friends, okay? Both of them spoke Arabic. One was Egyptian and the other one was from Iraq. And both of them speak fluent Arabic at a native level, okay? And so, guess which 2 skills they were good at? Was it reading or writing, or was it speaking and understanding? You're right, it's the latter. As a matter of fact, they couldn't read or write Arabic at all. That's right. They didn't know how to read or write Arabic at all, literally nothing, but somehow they're still completely fluent. And so that just sort of proves that the only 2 skills that are required are speaking and understanding, which means the only 2 exercises that you need to do are learn sir. Your constraint is that you haven't been doing the things that you need to do in order to have a conversation. You're doing pull-ups to train your legs, and most people know that that's not true. So why don't we have that same attitude for Spanish? So as a thank you gift for reaching the end of this video, I'm going to tell you about the free gift that I was talking about. So you can check the description to grab my free, easy-to-use Cognate cheat sheet where you'll be able to instantly unlock thousands of Spanish words. And there's no email needed. You don't need to opt in or anything. It is literally just yours and free, just directly, okay? And that's just my thank you gift for making it to the end of this video. And in that cheat sheet, you'll literally unlock like 2,500 to 5,000 Spanish words. And so check the description to grab that. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you shared this video with others, or subscribed, or commented, or liked, or any of that. I'd appreciate any feedback. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and stay humble.